The MSI Titan 18HX is a splurge gaming laptop that most people can't afford. But those few who can will get top-Endl specs, a ton of RAM and storage, and a clicky mechanical keyboard that feels great to type and game on, as well as a gorgeous mini LED display. There are some very lucky people in this world for whom money is not an object. For those people, there is the MSI Titan 18HX, a massive 18-inch gaming desktop replacement laptop with an Intel Core i9-14900HX CPU, NVIDIA GeForce RTX 4090 laptop GPU, a whopping 128 GB of RAM, and 4 TB of storage. For the price, the mechanical keyboard adds an air of luxury, and the mini LED display is vibrant and bright. You get ample ports, solid build quality, and room for some upgrades. Heck, we even found out the motherboard has a power button, which some tinkerers will enjoy. The Titan isn't all perfect. Its speakers are tuned fine for games, but not for music, and this is the type of machine you'll use for all purposes, that is, if you can enjoy the speakers over the sound of the fans, anyway. Design of the MSI Titan 18HX. The MSI Titan 18HX is a tank. It's bulky and large and heavy and frankly, only sort of portable. It's a 7.93-pound laptop with desktop ambitions. To MSI's credit, the design could fool you into thinking it's sleek. The magnesium alloy chassis features an all-black lid with an RGB dragon and a textured gray protruding rear to pack fans and extra I/O. That bump has a series of blue stripes, which I find a bit distracting, though I can't deny they add personality. This follows to the bottom of the laptop, which eschews the whole adult gamer look of the top half, and looks like something that fell off of a Decepticon. Lifting the lid reveals the true grandiosity of the Titan. You're immediately bombarded by the 18-inch mini LED display, with relatively thin bezels for a gaming machine, as well as an RGB, largely mechanical keyboard. There's also a sizable RGB touchpad with a catch. It's a haptic touchpad that's built into the glass that covers the entire wrist rest. It's a dramatic effect. But as we'll discuss more later, I do wish it had a physical border. There are plenty of ports around the sides of the Titan, so you likely won't need a dock. The left side features a pair of USB Type-A 3.2 Gen 2 ports and a full-sized SD card slot, while the right boasts a third Type-A port, 2 Thunderbolt 4 ports, and a 3.5mm headphone jack. On the back are the ports you're least likely to unplug. HDMI, Ethernet, and the power jack are all housed. Gaming and graphics on the MSI Titan 18HX. Between an Intel Core i9-14900HX, an NVIDIA GeForce RTX 4090, and 128 GB of RAM, we expected the Titan to play games well, so we pushed it hard in our tests. We compared it to the Asus ROG Strix Scar 18, another recent powerhouse using the same CPU and GPU, but with 32 GB of RAM. We also put it up against last year's Alienware M18 and MSI Titan GT77HX. To put this monster of a laptop to the test, I loaded up Alan Wake 2. The game forces DLSS or FSR and ran the game at 1920 by 1200 on the high preset with high ray tracing. With DLSS frame gen turned off, the game ran between 30 and 43 frames per second in early scenes. When I turned on frame gen, I would get up to 54 frames per second, though sometimes the game seemed unnaturally smooth. Each of the 4 large laptops in our test pool sports a different native resolution. While the Titan 18 goes up to 3840 by 2400, last year's Titan GT77 went up to 3840 by 2160 that was a 16:9 panel. The Alienware M18 or one we reviewed topped out at 1920 by 1200 to hit 480 Hz, while the more recent Asus ROG Strix Scar was a 2560 by 1600 panel. This makes 1920 by 1080 the common resolution we were able to test across the laptops. On the Shadow of the Tomb Raider benchmark, the Titan hit 190 frames per second at 1080p and 65 frames per second at its native resolution. At 1080p, it was beaten only by the Alienware, and those 2 frames aren't exactly a massive difference. On Cyberpunk 2077's ray tracing ultra settings, the Titan ran the benchmark at 69 frames per second at 1080p, but an unplayable 19 frames per second at its native resolution. It beat the Strix Scar, which reached 61 frames per second. We didn't test the older models with Cyberpunk, we adopted that test after those reviews. The Titan sailed through Far Cry 6 on ultra settings, running the test at 120 frames per second at FHD and 71 frames per second at 3840 by 2400. This was the most competitive at 1080p, with the Alienware and Scar coming in with similar scores, though last year's Titan fell behind. While Red Dead Redemption 2 at medium settings is still challenging for some rigs, the Titan tore through it at 135 frames per second at 1080p, tying with the Alienware. At its native 3840 by 2400, the Titan reached 71 frames per second, matching with the 4K screen on last year's model. Again, the Titan tangled with the Alienware on Borderlands 3, hitting 181 frames per second at 1080p and 64 frames per second at 3840 by 2400, while the Alienware hit 186 frames per second at 1080p. Last year's Titan outperformed at 4K, but was behind at 1080p. As a stress test, we run the Metro Exodus benchmark on the RTX preset 15 times, which simulates about half an hour of gameplay. The Titan ran the game at an average of 117.887 frames per second. The Core i9-14900HX's performance cores ran at an average of 4.52 GHz, while the efficiency cores ran at 3.62 GHz. The CPU package measured 88.4 degrees Celsius. Meanwhile, the GPU ran at 2077.62 MHz and measured 68.59 C. Productivity performance on the MSI Titan 18HX. With an Intel Core i9-14900HX, a whopping 128 GB of DDR5 RAM and 4 TB of SSD storage, it's unlikely any moderate usage would make the Titan sweat. Because last year's Titan and Alienware were tested before the latest version of Geekbench 6, we fell back to Geekbench 5. On single core, the Titan 18HX won out at 2072, just surpassing last year's Titan by 1 point. Notably, the Titan 18HX fell behind both of last year's 13th Gen Intel Core laptops on the multi-core test. The new Titan 18HX led the group in our file transfer test, copying 25 GB of files at a rate of 2,664.34 MB per second. It just edged out the latest Strix Scar and last year's Titan. MSI's latest also won out on Handbrake, transcoding a 4K video to 1080p in 2 minutes and 32 seconds. That's 6 seconds faster than last year's model and also significantly better than the Strix Scar. Display on the MSI Titan 18HX. The 18-inch mini LED display on the Titan is colorful, vibrant, and intensely bright. MSI has finally moved the Titan to a 16:10 aspect ratio, resulting in a resolution of 3840 by 2400, just above traditional 4K. The 18-inch panel can run at 120 Hz, which is a bit slower than the 17-inch 16:9 version from last year. I used it to check out the trailer for the upcoming remake of Roadhouse. The trailer starts with some dark scenes in yellow lighting, and I could see Jake Gyllenhaal beat down a bunch of dudes in a parking lot far better than I could on other screens I watched it on. The mini LED panel also showed off some beautiful blue Florida oceans. In the opening scenes of Alan Wake 2, the HDR screen proved adept at showing green forests and, unfortunately, copious amounts of red blood. The Titan's mini LED panel covers 112.4% of the DCI P3 gamut and 159% of the sRGB space. That's a minuscule bit behind last year's model, which also has mini LED, but not enough to matter, because the new Titan has something else on its side: brightness. On our light meter, the Titan 18HX measured an average of 559 nits of brightness, surpassing last year's model 511 nits and easily beating both the Alienware and the Asus. It's a truly superb screen, and the brightness is especially impressive. Games and all sorts of video look great on this monitor. It's one of the best I've seen on a gaming notebook. Battery life on the MSI Titan 18HX. Don't let the massive 99.99 watt-hour battery on the Titan 18HX fool you. This laptop effectively requires the wall charger. Maybe it's the bright screen, or perhaps it's the metric tons of RGB, or possibly it's the powerful components that chug electricity. In reality, it's a combination of them. On our test, a mix of web browsing, streaming video, and OpenGL graphics tests emptied the battery in 2 hours and 40 minutes. The Asus ROG Strix Scar 18 beat it at 428, as did last year's Alienware M18 and Titan GT77. Keyboard and touchpad on the MSI Titan 18HX. I love most of the keyboard on the MSI Titan 18HX. The majority of the Titan's keys use Cherry MX low-profile switches, and they feel excellent. I would accept most gaming laptops getting a bit thicker to fit them, and they're a joy to type on compared to typical membrane keyboards. On the monkey type test, I hit 122 words per minute with my standard 2% error rate. Not bad. The keys also pop up nicely for repetitive presses in games. But there are some oddities in the keyboard. Both shift keys are a bit short, but the right one is particularly noticeable. This is a trade-off, though, that lets MSI fit full-sized arrow keys in an inverted T configuration. But to do that, MSI also has miniaturized keys to the right of the spacebar, including Alt, an extra backslash key, Control, and FN. Besides being smaller than expected, they're also not mechanical. A number of other key switches also aren't mechanical, including the arrow keys, the entire number pad, and the function row. While I'm a bit more forgiving of the function row, I do feel that asking for a fully mechanical keyboard on a $5,400 laptop doesn't seem like a huge ask. Still, it's a massive leg up over the mini gaming laptops without mechanical switches at all. The touchpad is a large, haptic RGB rectangle built seamlessly into the glass covering the touchpad. Much like the Dell XPS 13 Plus, it provides a futuristic look. While I'm a big fan of haptic touchpads, especially when they're done well, I do like having a border to feel when I'm near the edge. If you have the touchpad backlight on, you can very easily see where the edges are. And while I had no issues with tracking or gestures throughout my times with the Titan, I did wish they would have etched a small rectangle in the glass. While this isn't the first time we've seen an RGB touchpad, it can be distracting. Turning it off might be appealing to some people, especially while gaming. Most gamers use a mouse, and clearly MSI knows this, as it includes its M99 gaming mouse in the box. When I played games, I shut off the touchpad light and used a mouse. While it wasn't hard to find the touchpad again when I switched back to work, a subtle border would have been nice. Audio on the MSI Titan 18HX. I wasn't terribly excited by the Titan speakers when I used them to listen to music. I loaded up Hosier's Funky DeSelby and found that while the Titan can fill a room, it's not as loud to my ears as some competing laptops. While the vocals and guitars were clear, the bass was effectively missing. But the volume couldn't overpower the very loud fans, so you'll definitely want one of the best gaming headsets. Heat on the MSI Titan 18HX. We measured surface temperatures on the Titan while running our Metro Exodus stress test. Unfortunately for our coworkers, we did this in our office. The fans kept the system cooler than we expected in some cases, considering its size and components. But the fans were loud and people complained about the noise of one from 2 desk rows down the office. In fact, the fans can be loud even when the laptop is just sitting on the Windows desktop. It wasn't rare for me to walk away from my desk and to come back to it whirring away. During the stress test, the keyboard between the G and H keys measured 110.5 degrees Fahrenheit, which is a bit toasty, while the touchpad, or at least the glass the haptics sit underneath, was a cooler 85 Fahrenheit or 29.5 centigrade. The hottest point on the bottom of the laptop measured 113.5 Fahrenheit or 45.3 centigrade, which isn't much worse than the keyboard. Webcam on the MSI Titan 18HX. Finally, the MSI Titan has moved to a 1080p webcam. As recently as last year, it was rocking a 720p sensor, so it's nice to see the improvement from a pure spec sheet perspective. That being said, this webcam is just okay. While it's good with detail, and I could see individual hairs and even a nick from shaving, the colors ran warm. I had a slight red tint to my skin, and my olive shirt didn't look exactly right. The webcam has an IR sensor to log in with your face and includes a physical shutter. This one doesn't cut power to the webcam, but blocking it is enough for me. Check the video description for the conclusion. Blade.